Every day, thousands of flights take off, carrying millions of passengers to destinations across the world. Pilots follow strict protocols, relying on their extensive training and experience to ensure a safe journey. The technology that powers modern aviation is among the most advanced ever built. But even with all these safeguards in place, some flights are destined for disaster. The camera zooms in on a cockpit, where pilots go through their final pre-flight checklists. The captain, a seasoned aviator, nods as his first officer reads off system statuses. Everything is in order. The flight is cleared for takeoff. Captain. Fuel check complete. Flaps set for departure. Autopilot ready. We're good to go. First officer. Confirmed. Cleared for takeoff. Runway 32 left. The engines roar to life, the aircraft rolling down the runway, gradually picking up speed. The nose lifts, and the plane ascends into the sky. From the outside, it's a textbook departure. But beneath the surface, a chain of events has already begun, one that will lead to a terrifying mid-air crisis. Narrator. For the passengers, the flight seems routine. Seatbelt signs switch off, flight attendants begin service, and the hum of the engines provides a soothing backdrop. Many travelers glance out their windows, watching the Earth disappear below. But what they don't realize is that within the aircraft structure, a hidden danger is waiting. A close-up shot of a critical mechanical component deep within the aircraft. A tiny crack, a loose bolt, or a fatigued piece of metal. Something minuscule but catastrophic lurks, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Narrator. In aviation, even the smallest oversight, error, or mechanical defect can spell disaster. A missed inspection, a miscalculation in fuel levels, an unnoticed crack in a critical component, any of these can transform a routine flight into a battle for survival. But in these early moments, no one on board has any idea that their journey is about to take a terrifying turn. The camera moves through the cabin, showing passengers engaged in casual activities, reading, chatting, or sleeping. A flight attendant reassures a nervous traveler, smiling as she offers a drink. The atmosphere is peaceful, unknowing. Narrator. But high above the clouds, unforeseen events can unfold in an instant. Pilots train for countless emergencies, but nothing truly prepares them for the shock of seeing their instruments suddenly flash red, their aircraft lurch unpredictably, and the alarms start blaring. The calm is shattered. A sudden jolt shakes the aircraft. The flight attendants pause, glancing around with concern. In the cockpit, the pilots feel it too. Something isn't right. The captain's expression shifts from relaxed confidence to focused concern. First officer, checking instruments. Tense? That felt like an airframe vibration. Checking systems now. Captain, tightening grip on controls. Something's off. Let's run diagnostics. Narrator. At first, it seems like nothing more than turbulence. But turbulence doesn't trigger warning lights. The pilots quickly realize that this is something far more serious. The aircraft's sensors are picking up inconsistencies, an erratic fuel pressure reading, a sudden shift in altitude, or a warning light for an overheating engine. The situation is evolving quickly, and the flight crew must act fast. Inside the cabin, the passengers feel the unsettling movements of the aircraft. Some grip their armrests, others look around nervously. The once calm flight attendants are now moving swiftly, securing loose items and preparing for any instructions from the cockpit. Narrator. The first few moments of any in-flight emergency are critical. Pilots must diagnose the problem, decide on a course of action, and communicate with air traffic control, all within seconds. But some malfunctions leave no time for troubleshooting. A close-up of the aircraft's wing. Suddenly, a metallic snap echoes. A crucial component has failed. The aircraft violently jerks to one side, throwing passengers and crew off balance. Oxygen masks drop from the ceiling. Captain, urgently speaking into radio. Mayday. Mayday. We have an emergency, requesting immediate return to the nearest airport. ATC, calm but alert. Copy Flight 239. State nature of emergency. The aircraft now battles against the forces of nature and mechanical failure. The passengers, once oblivious, are now fully aware that something is terribly wrong. The flight attendants shout commands to brace for possible impact. The pilots fight to stabilize the aircraft. Narrator: this is the terrifying reality of an in-flight emergency. What started as a routine journey has become a life-or-death struggle. Will the crew be able to regain control? Can the aircraft make an emergency landing? Or will the situation spiral into a full-scale disaster? The flight crew has only seconds to diagnose the problem. Every warning alarm demands attention, but in a crisis, not all alerts are immediate threats. The pilots must sift through the chaos, determine the cause of the malfunction, and react swiftly. Time is running out. The first officer frantically scans the instrument panel. His fingers tap at switches, attempting to override failing systems. The captain's voice is steady but firm, issuing commands as they work together to stabilize the aircraft. Captain, we've got an engine warning. Throttling down number 2. Check fuel pressure. First officer. Fuel pressure dropping fast. We might have a leak. Auto throttle is unresponsive. Narrator: a sudden jolt sends a tremor through the aircraft, causing overhead compartments to rattle. In the cabin, passengers grip their armrests as the plane dips slightly before leveling out again. The cabin crew exchanges glances, their training kicking in as they prepare for the worst. A close-up shot of the wing. Small trails of vapor stream from the underside. The unseen problem is growing worse by the second. The aircraft is losing fuel, and the crew has no way of stopping it mid-flight. Narrator: fuel starvation at cruising altitude is a nightmare scenario. If the engines fail, the aircraft will be forced into an emergency descent, and the crew must find the nearest airport, if one is even within reach. The captain reaches for the radio, speaking quickly yet clearly to air traffic control. His voice is controlled, but the tension is undeniable. Captain, over radio. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Flight 239 declaring an emergency. We have a critical fuel issue. Request immediate diversion. Air traffic control, ATC. Responding quickly. Flight 239, confirm nature of emergency. Stand by for alternate airport coordinates. First officer, urgently. Captain, fuel is still draining fast. We may not make it to the closest airfield. Narrator: with each passing second, the situation worsens. The pilots must act now, weighing their options between attempting a risky emergency landing or preparing for a controlled ditching in open water. The camera cuts to the cabin. Flight attendants are now moving with purpose, checking seatbelts, instructing passengers to brace for possible impact. Murmurs of fear spread through the cabin, but the crew remains professional and reassuring. Narrator: the next moments will determine the fate of everyone on board. As the aircraft descends, the crew must balance speed, altitude, and direction to give them the best possible chance at survival. But there is no guarantee of success. A close-up of the pilot's hands gripping the controls, sweat forming on their brows. They are doing everything they can to keep the aircraft stable, but gravity and dwindling fuel are against them. Captain, prepare for emergency procedures. I want full focus. We're bringing this plane down safely. First officer. Confirmed. Engaging emergency landing checklist. ATC, we need immediate clearance for approach. ATC, you are clear for priority landing. Runway is being cleared now. Emergency teams are on standby. The aircraft's descent is rough, the airframe groaning under the strain. The pilots wrestle with the yoke, struggling to keep it steady. The ground is approaching fast, and the margin for error is razor-thin. Narrator: every second counts. The aircraft is dangerously close to losing full engine power. The crew must execute a perfect emergency landing or risk catastrophe. There is no turning back now. The aircraft is now in its final descent. With fuel nearly depleted and engine power failing, the pilots have one last chance to guide the plane to a safe landing. Every decision they make in these next moments will determine whether they walk away or whether this flight ends in catastrophe. A close-up shot of the control panel. Warning lights continue flashing, alarms blaring. The captain and first officer remain composed, their hands gripping the yoke tightly. Captain, voice strained but steady. Landing gear down. Flaps to full. We have to bring her in as smoothly as possible. First officer. Reading checklist. Landing gear confirmed down. Speed brakes armed. Emergency crews standing by. Narrator. As the ground rushes closer, the pilots prepare for the most critical phase of their emergency landing. The runway is in sight, but without full control of their aircraft, they must rely on sheer skill and precision to make it down safely. The camera cuts to an external view of the aircraft. Smoke trails from one of the engines, and the plane wobbles as it struggles to align with the runway. Emergency vehicles line the tarmac, red and blue lights flashing as crews prepare for impact. Narrator. Inside the cabin, the tension is unbearable. Flight attendants shout final instructions, urging passengers to brace for impact. Some passengers clasp their hands together in silent prayers. Others grip the armrests, eyes squeezed shut. The air is thick with fear. A close-up shot of a mother holding her child, whispering reassurances despite the terror in her own eyes. Across the aisle, a man grips the seat in front of him, knuckles white. Flight attendant, loud, commanding voice. Brace. 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 Heads down, stay low. Narrator. At 500 feet, the aircraft begins to sink faster than expected. The captain fights against the descent, pulling back just enough to soften the approach. But there is one final challenge. The landing gear may not hold on impact. The cockpit view zooms in on the altimeter as numbers rapidly decrease. The pilots exhale sharply, bracing themselves for the inevitable contact with the ground. Captain, urgently. Hold on. A deafening thud as the plane slams onto the runway. The tires screech, smoke billowing as the brakes struggle to engage. The force of the impact sends a violent jolt through the fuselage. Inside, passengers are thrown forward against their seatbelts. Overhead compartments pop open, sending loose items tumbling into the aisles. Narrator. The aircraft is skidding. The left engine has completely failed, causing the plane to veer sharply to one side. The pilots wrestle with the controls, desperate to keep the plane from veering off the runway. First officer, shouting, "We're pulling left." Rudder correction applied. Captain. Speed brakes deployed. Hold on. A close-up shot of the aircraft tires, smoking under the strain. The emergency crews on the ground move into position, ready to respond. Narrator. The seconds feel like an eternity, but finally, the aircraft comes to a stop. For a brief moment, there is complete silence in the cabin. Then a wave of emotion. Some passengers begin sobbing, others let out gasps of relief. The flight attendants immediately move into action, opening the emergency exits and deploying the slides. The cockpit camera shows the captain slumping back in his seat, hands still shaking. The first officer exhales heavily, nodding to his captain. Captain, softly, almost in disbelief. We made it. Narrator. But the danger isn't over yet. The crew must evacuate the passengers as quickly as possible. Smoke is now seeping into the cabin from the damaged engine, and the risk of fire is high. A flight attendant pulls open an emergency door, yanking the slide into place. Passengers begin rushing toward the exits, panic still lingering in their eyes. Flight attendant, firmly guiding passengers. Leave everything behind. Move, move, move. Narrator. On the ground, firefighters and paramedics rush to assist. Within moments, foam is sprayed onto the aircraft to prevent flames, and emergency personnel help passengers move away from the wreckage. A final overhead shot of the scene, a massive but intact aircraft sitting in the middle of the runway, surrounded by flashing emergency lights. The passengers and crew, though shaken, are alive. Narrator. Against all odds, Flight 239 has survived the crisis. Thanks to the skill and determination of its crew, a disaster was narrowly avoided. But as the investigation begins, one question remains: what caused this near catastrophe? And how can future flights be protected from the same fate? The immediate danger has passed, but the investigation is just beginning. How did this flight go from routine to catastrophe in a matter of moments? The answers lie within the wreckage, inside the cockpit voice recorder and in the accounts of the survivors. A close-up of an investigator carefully retrieving the aircraft's black boxes from the wreckage. The small, bright orange devices, battered but intact, hold the key to unlocking the sequence of events that led to the near disaster. Lead investigator, speaking to press, "We have recovered both the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. Our priority now is to analyze the data and understand what caused this emergency." Narrator. As investigators pore over the evidence, patterns begin to emerge. The flight data reveals a sudden fuel imbalance, a warning that appeared well before the crisis escalated. But the cockpit recordings suggest something even more troubling. The pilots did not initially realize the severity of the situation until it was almost too late. A reconstruction animation shows the aircraft's fuel indicators fluctuating erratically, while the pilots struggle to diagnose the issue. The simulation highlights the moment when fuel levels reached a critical low, triggering engine failure. Narrator. The investigation uncovers a chilling truth. This disaster was preventable. A faulty fuel pump sensor, undetected during pre-flight checks, had been misreading fuel levels for most of the flight. The pilots, relying on inaccurate data, were unaware they were burning fuel at an accelerated rate until the engines began to fail. A flashback to the maintenance hangar days before the flight shows mechanics conducting a routine inspection. One technician checks a fuel sensor, but moves on without catching the hidden defect. The oversight, seemingly small at the time, would later put an entire aircraft at risk. Narrator. Further analysis reveals another disturbing factor: communication breakdown in the cockpit. In the critical moments of the emergency, confusion and misinterpretation delayed corrective action. The first officer initially believed the problem was an engine failure, while the captain focused on electrical diagnostics. Valuable seconds were lost, allowing the crisis to escalate beyond their control. An overlay of the cockpit transcript appears on screen, showing the moments of confusion between the crew. First officer. Fuel pressure looks unstable. Maybe an issue with a left engine. Captain. No warning for engine failure yet. Let's check electrical first. Narrator. In high-stress situations, clear and immediate decision-making is crucial. The delays in identifying the true issue nearly cost the lives of everyone on board. The final report highlights the importance of enhanced pilot training for rare but deadly scenarios like fuel mismanagement and emergency landings. Aviation experts and safety regulators hold a press conference, outlining new recommendations based on the findings. Aviation safety official. We are implementing stricter fuel sensor checks, improved emergency procedure training, and a revision in cockpit communication protocols to ensure better coordination in crisis situations. Narrator. The changes are swift. Airlines around the world reassess their fuel monitoring systems, ensuring all sensors are tested before every flight. Simulated emergency scenarios become mandatory in pilot training, designed to improve reaction time and communication under extreme pressure. A montage of pilots in simulators responding to similar fuel emergencies with enhanced precision and teamwork. Narrator. But for the passengers and crew of Flight 239, the changes come too late. Though they survived, their experience serves as a stark reminder of how quickly small oversights can turn into full-scale disasters. A final shot of the survivors gathered at a memorial site, honoring the near tragedy that reshaped aviation safety. A plaque commemorates the event, with an inscription, "In honor of those who endured, and in pursuit of safer skies." Narrator. Aviation safety is built on lessons learned from tragedy. Every near miss, every crash, every recovered black box contributes to a future where flights are safer, where mistakes are caught in time, and where the difference between life and death is measured not in chance, but in preparation.